Hey Gareth, how you doing?
Alfie, I'm very well. How are you?
Good, thank you.
Good.
Back for another episode.
Back for another episode. This is becoming a regular thing, isn't it? It's good. Like the
Yeah,
momentum, the consistency.
exactly. You have to stay consistent,
That's
Gareth.
that's what
That's
it's all about, isn't it? Yeah.
in everything we do. We preach consistency, so this is just one of those things, I guess.
Great stuff. So, what's on for today? What's the topic of the day?
I was thinking, kind of in line with some of the discussions we had today, actually, just the concept of commercial accountability within agencies. I think that's a good one to talk about because in different forms, people ask questions that revolve around commercial accountability, whether or not they know it. Some of the challenges and the problems stem from the lack of commercial accountability within their agency. So I thought we could talk about that today. How
Yeah,
does that sound?
that sounds good because that came up this morning, didn't it? That we touched
It
upon
did
that.
come up this morning, exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
We obviously work together with some of our clients, but separately as well with other clients, individually with other clients. And as I said this morning, that topic has reared its head a number of times recently with people I'm working with, different people I'm working with. I could say 4 agencies, 5 agencies maybe in the last month or so, where I've talked to them about that commercial accountability or this that's apparent that it's lacking in some way and causing the
Mhm.
agency problems. So yeah, it's a good one.
Yeah. Cool. Okay. So should we start at the very beginning, breaking down what we mean when we say commercial accountability? So, how would you describe it? What would you say is the definition of commercial accountability in this context?
Yeah, that's a good one. Put me on the spot now. I guess, I mean, I don't have a textbook or a dictionary definition, but commercial accountability, what are we talking about? I think it's to the degree individuals, employees in an agency, and the teams in an agency sort of understand, own, and maybe act in alignment with the commercial realities of the business, really. So, commercial realities being revenue generation, profit, hopefully, profit margins, efficiency, how they create value. So, do people in the business at all levels understand that stuff? Do they own it? Are they in some way accountable for it? They're all accountable in some way, but do people recognise that they're accountable for it? And do they take action on that basis? So, I guess we're trying to encourage people here not just to do their job, whatever that job in the business might be. It's having an understanding of how your work, how your job impacts the P&L of the business and the commercial performance of the business, and choosing to making sure you're doing work that is moving the needle for the business, not just filling the day, not just. And we're not suggesting for a second here. I think it's important to say up front that most people in agencies, is that certainly that we work with are, or anybody in the agency we work with are lazy or not doing the work, but are they doing the right things at the right time? And are they choosing the right things based on the fact that those things will move the needle commercially and they're the priorities because that's what's making us money, that's what's making us profit.
Yeah, good one. The way I describe it when I do training, of course, I do commercial training for agencies, is sort of everybody understanding the agency model and the goals of the agencies and what their roles are in helping the agency to achieve that goal.
Yeah.
So ultimately, many agencies focus on growth. So that is, the sales, the profitability, efficiencies within the agency. Well, every individual in that agency has got a role to play.
Yeah.
What is your role in helping the agency achieve that? So it's all goal congruence. So how do we all align on the same commercial goals for this agency? And how can you help us do that as an employee?
Yeah, totally. There's a sort of transition or journey that I see. I don't know whether you concur with this, but I think that commercial accountability is inherent in the founders of the business, the agency, isn't it? Of
Mm,
course it is,
mm, mm.
because it's their business, their livelihood, their life, their ability to put food on the table for family, their future in terms of money that they might accrue to sort of provide themselves with the future. So it's they're entrepreneurs, it's their business. I think there's degrees of levels of that sort of commercial focus in agencies and other businesses. Some people are very ambitious, very commercially focused. Other people are they're all running businesses, but they're more sort of interested in the work and the sort of maybe a lifestyle type of business rather than a high growth business. So there's degrees there, but the founders into of course they are. But I think and I think when the agency is small and the agency has that's not just the founder, they have employees. That focus on the commercial performance of the business, it very easily rubs off on the one, two, three, four handful of employees that are in that business, doesn't it? Because they're a small team. They're working together in a very tight knit function. The communication is good. The founders high profile within the team. Maybe they're not all sat in a room anymore. Sometimes they are, but maybe they don't have to these days. Maybe they're working remotely, but nevertheless they see each other a lot and they get the vibe of the commercial focus and drive rubs off on the team. But then as the agency grows, naturally more people come into the business and that sort of commercial focus can lose its impact. And so you get to an agency where there's 10 or 12 people plus, and the commercial accountability in the business is not lost completely, but it's dissipated, it's diluted. Because there's more people doing different things. Maybe the founder isn't as present with each member of the team as they are when it's small, and all those sort of things going on. So there's a sort of that commercial accountability. Like I said, I see that diluted. Is that firstly, does that make any sense? And secondly, is that what you see as well?
No, absolutely. It does make sense. So there's another side to this, which I'll come to in a minute, but I do agree with you on that. So smaller agencies, very easy for the founders to pass that on, even in form of mentorship in some way, shape, or form, right? The teams are so close to the founders and the leaders that it rubs off on them or they follow suit.
Yeah,
But as they grow bigger, it's much harder to do that. You employ more people, the commerciality or the commercial culture gets diluted with more people coming in with different ways of doing things from other agencies and different ideas of how to get things done. It does naturally dilute.
yeah,
So that is true. But there's another side to it that I see, which is where the founders and leaders themselves don't have the commercial acumen or the commercial accountability themselves. And it robs off on the staff, right? So many times
yeah,
when we work with
yeah,
certain founders, we're suggesting ways of doing things, whether it's pricing or positioning, whatever it is, and the founders themselves don't know what we're talking about. And a good example is, timesheeting or reviewing utilization and reports and things that will give them insight into what's going on commercially in their business. And they don't have a clue. On the extreme side, not only do they not have a clue, they're kind of averse to doing it themselves. And then it makes you wonder, well, if you as the leader or founder doesn't have that drive
yeah,
or accountability,
yeah,
then how do you expect other people to do the right thing, kind of thing? So I do definitely see the one side, which is where the agency founders or leaders have that in them
yeah,
and they pass it on, whether consciously or unconsciously, to their employees. But then there's the other side I see of they don't have a clue themselves. They're great at what they do, which is delivering the service. But when it comes to the commercials,
yeah.
they don't know it. And they don't know it, they can't pass it down.
No, but
Sometimes you get someone who's in the business who's probably come from maybe a bigger agency and they're trying their best to push certain things. But as we both know, these sorts of things, the commercial acumen or the accountability starts from the top.
yes,
And if the owners and founders aren't serious about doing it or serious about implementing some of
yeah,
these processes, then it's just going to fall apart.
yeah.
So,
No,
have you seen the second example?
absolutely. Yeah, now you've raised it. I totally see that. We've come into contact with that sort of many times, and I guess it's that lack from the founders, so lack of a grip on the numbers from the founders, and then, like you say, that rubs off on the rest of the team. Why do we need to have an understanding of the numbers that the founder doesn't seem to focus on that? And I guess that can be for a couple of reasons as well, can't it? That can be through just lack of knowledge on the founder's part, lack of experience. Sometimes I touched upon earlier. Sometimes some people are more commercially driven than others. Some people are, as you said, driven by the service that they provide, driven by the product that they provide. Not just the product, but create the creative output is what
Yeah.
drives people, not necessarily the numbers. But in the early stages, that sort of gains some early stage momentum, doesn't it? And gets a business to a reasonable size, starts to employ a few people. But then when you want to scale it, you've got to have a grip of the numbers. And yeah, absolutely. We've seen both of us together, and I'm sure many times individually, where not every owner of an agency, founder of an agency, even though it might be a reasonably big business, has an understanding of some of the basic concepts of commercial running a commercial business. And even if they understand the concepts, they don't use them, they don't deploy them, they don't know what the numbers are, they don't have a clear grip on them. So yeah, just as you were talking then, I think, so I agree with that. I think probably there's somewhere in the middle of those two things as well, where the business grows as the team grows, doesn't follow the founder, doesn't have access to the founder enough, so they don't see the numbers. As you said, the founder themselves on the other side doesn't have a good enough grip of the numbers. But then somewhere in the middle, there's also, I think, that this piece for me where maybe in the early stages, some founders, translate that commercial accountability
Mm,
into their team, but they do it naturally. They do
mm,
it because they're with them, and they sort of, but they don't truly. I'm not going to say train because it's not about formal training, but they don't lay the foundations. They don't do anything formal sort of education of those things. It's just because they're there, and it's sort of osmosis, if you like. But then when the founder not necessarily steps away, but when the founder becomes more detached, I think there's maybe a third scenario where they then look back and say, well, why isn't this team commercially aware? Why aren't they looking at the numbers like we used to? Well, they're not, because you're not as close to it or as close to them. And also, you've not told them or given them you've not trained them or educated them or coached them in how to do that. So they've sort of, they're just focusing on their roles, not the business as a whole.
I remember a few years ago, I did a post on LinkedIn talking about this stuff where what I was saying was you, as an owner or a founder, you can't really blame people if you haven't given them the tools commercially to do what you want them to do.
Yeah,
I don't think it's fair
yeah,
because sometimes founders and owners act on the assumption that, well, this person is senior, they should know this stuff, or they've worked here in this agency or that agency in the past, so this should come naturally to them. But that isn't really the case. So if the owners haven't made a conscious effort
yeah.
to educate people and give them the tools and processes to be commercially aware, then the accountability part doesn't really fit in because you can't hold me accountable for something that you haven't really defined properly and you haven't rolled out as an official process, so to speak. So, what you find sometimes is the leaders and the founders only get serious, they crack down on everybody and what everyone's doing only when things are going bad.
Yes.
So when things are going good, it's like, yeah, just do, that's fine. Just do what you want, do what you think is right. And, there's no real process because money's flowing in by sheer luck. You're profitable without tracking anything or doing anything. And then the moment you lose a few clients and the profitability starts to go down, you then start holding people to account, saying, what are you doing here? What's your this? What's your that? And, I remember this one client one time, they had never set a target for any of the senior leadership. And something happened where they lost a big client, and that client was a big percentage of their income. So at the point when that happened, they just went straight to the leadership team, like, oh, I can't believe you're not doing anything to move us forward. You're not selling, you're not this, you're not, and it was a shock to those people because they were like, yeah, but we've never sold. We've never been
Yeah,
given any sales targets or any, training or anything to go for that.
yeah,
So why now? So I think, yeah, to your point, I think the where the founders or the owners kind of move away, if that process hasn't been established, then that's kind of a recipe for disaster because everyone's kind of walking blind. They don't know what they're supposed to be doing. So how do you hold them to account?
You're absolutely right, of course. You know that when, if sadly the numbers are not looking good, things are challenging times, and numbers are not where they should be, that's the wrong time, isn't it, to start to sort of talk to people about commercial accountability because that stresses are high, founders are stressed, worried, concerned. People pick up on that. Then people start to worry, and so that education piece is needs to be done much before that. You know, before anything that hopefully it doesn't. But if commercial performance of the business is well, that's high or well, that's good, rather than waiting till when it dips.
Yeah.
I just realised that you do this sort of commercial training for agencies, don't you? I just realised this is just one long ad for your training services.
Why do you think I came up with the topic, Gareth?
Just completely hoodwink me into talking about this, so you can say, by the way, I do training teams, which you do. But that's right. You know, I sort of saying it's not training. There is training because you do it. I'm not part of that. You know, that is a good investment, isn't it? And if you can bring somebody in like yourself to do that, then it's often good to hear from a third party about some of these things rather than hear about from the founder, the owner of the business, because you get external knowledge as well that maybe they, as we said earlier, the founder doesn't actually have because they're not a finance person, they're a creative person or a PR person or a dev or something originally.
Yeah, this is just a throwaway free advice for everyone. I won't charge for this. But usually, when it comes to training, whether you're getting someone external or you choose to do it yourself, the key thing when you think about changed behavior, which is what we're talking about, really, if you're talking about, training people to do something and think a certain way, is usually to start with why. Why are you saying we should do this thing? What's the important? What's the benefit? Because that part is usually lacking. Founders or leaders will just say, yeah, we need to do this, we need to do that, we need to do that, we need to track time. The people don't understand why. And usually these tasks aren't really the most fun things to do. So natural instinct or human behavior will be, yeah, I don't want to do it. And if they don't understand fundamentally the reason for doing it, they might do it, but they won't do it correctly or they won't take it seriously or whatever. So the first thing is always start with why. Explain the why to the people, then give them the process of how, right? So that's a free tip
Yeah,
for anyone listening.
I love that. I love that. And the why people agencies need to do it, I would say, is not just about the founder's P&L or the agency P&L, is it? Or the founder's profitability or the agency profitability or the dividends or anything like that. That is a key. That is obviously important to the head of the business. But it's not. That's not the only reason why this stuff is important, is it? Because there's many other things. I think what we were talking about this morning, and I've been talking about with other agencies, is actually slightly removed from the true financial performance of the business. It's the commercial operation of the business. It's how um, people are struggling with workload. It's inefficiency in the system. It's lack of capacity, not because there's not enough people, although that's the usual default solution to this, which is usually the wrong one, to add more people in. It's that sort of waste in the system, isn't it? Because people are doing the wrong things sometimes, maybe too much of the right things, as in over servicing clients. It's the right,
Mhm.
the right mind or the right principle, as in we want to make our clients happy. But if we're spending too much time servicing them and the commercials don't stack up against that, then, and I've seen that loads of times recently where, where people have been out with, the founders have got these spreadsheets looking at how, their clients are being over serviced. But then the teams that are actually doing the work and doing that over servicing, when I ask and sort of dig into, well, do they know how much effort or application they should be putting onto that client, how much work that they should be doing for that client each week or month? The answer is often no, or certainly it's clarity. It's not clear what they should be doing. So
Yeah.
it's that situation where, well, is it any wonder in some cases why we're over servicing them? Because the people actually doing the work don't have any commercial accountability for that client, really. They're just told to do this, told to do that, and they do it because they want to make the client happy. And get the results or whatever, but they also want to make the business and the founder happy as well by doing that. But that's the sort of ultimate goal. But really, beneath it is that commercial accountability that sometimes people, as we've been saying, just don't see, are not aware of.
Yeah. And that last sentence you had there of aware of, a big part of this is the insight to start off with, right? So some agencies, the founders have got clear visibility of the numbers, the operations, and everything else. But the team, even the senior leadership people, don't have access to any of that insight.
Yeah,
They don't know,
yeah,
like you said there, how much input should they have on these projects?
yeah,
No clue. And if you don't know or not measuring what you're doing, how do you improve it? Right. So that's a big part of it. I think sometimes the problem is that the insight is missing into the operations, or it just sits with the founders and they're not talking to people enough. They're not sharing it. They're not giving people direction based on the insights that they've got. So that's definitely something that founders need to be considering more, is give the information out, make people aware of what they should be doing. And if you're tracking anything, what are you seeing from what you're tracking? And then only then can you then hold them accountable to say, okay, as a team, we were meant to be servicing to this level, and you knew this because we did it all together, and you had the information. But on the back of that, here's where we're sitting, which is so far from where we should be. How can we fix this kind of thing? That's where the accountability piece starts to come in. But without that insight or knowledge or the flow of information, I feel like it then becomes a challenge, the whole accountability thing.
yeah, totally, totally. But I mean, people can't be expected or can't be accountable for numbers they don't see or understand or are not even aware of, can they? Just can't, they can't be, can they? So that's one of the early steps. And I actually got a recent example of that where an agency I'm working with, we were talking about this sort of stuff, and one of the sort of actions was, well, we'll make the quarterly sales targets more visible. We're not talking about them enough. They weren't completely hidden, but they weren't visible. So he actually uh, put the numbers on a whiteboard in the office that this founder I work with, and in terms of the quarterly targets that they've got over the year. And even that little, it sounds like it is a little thing, but it just made them visible. And he didn't just write them up and leave them. He got everybody around in the office and explained why he'd done that and what they meant, etc. But then a couple of days later, he told me last week he caught a couple of his um, it's a paid media agency. A couple of his sort of PPC managers stood around the board, pointing at things, talking about the numbers. And as he walked past, he said, "Oh, yeah, guys, you okay?" And they were saying, "Yeah, we've just got a question on." He'd broken it down a little bit and said, "This client we work on here, that's contributing. So the next quarter, that's incredible." And there was some really insightful questions coming from these guys that are ultimately doing the work, generating the revenue, are the smart guys because they're sort of handling the PPC management, etc. But they'd seen something in the numbers that had just puzzled them. And there was two questions. One he answered, and they said, "Okay, great." But another, they got a good point about sort of how they could maybe grow the business, and said, should we be approaching them with this idea because that means that we could get a bit more revenue and maybe get closer to that target. And he was like
Mm.
amazed. I was like, wow. So it's just, a live example of this sort of stuff in action where you make those numbers visible and people start to not only feel a bit of accountability, but start to contribute, start to sort of discuss them and have an input in them.
Yeah, because you have to remember, as a founder, you don't know everything, right? In the last podcast session we had, we talked about, working on the business rather in the business. The more the agency grows, the less involved the founder is and should be in the day to day. So this example you've given is a good one because the people who are on the ground actually servicing the clients have got a lot of ideas that the founder probably isn't thinking about at that point in time. The founder's more concerned with top level strategy, growth, all of that sort of stuff.
Yeah,
And they might have lost touch with the small things that could make a difference. So, like in your example just then, those people, as long as they get the insights, as long as they get involved, then they can offer suggestions and things on how to make things better, right? And again, that's where that accountability comes in, and you don't even need to enforce it as much, because most people are willing to and want to help. They want to be part of the agency's growth and development, and they want to contribute to the growth of the business. But again, if they don't have the knowledge of what they should be doing, or the tools or insights, all that sort of stuff, they just can't contribute. So that's a good example of where once you give them everything, then they start to throw ideas that you as a founder probably aren't even thinking
Yeah,
about, because you're not in the day to day.
totally. Yeah. And I think, I've seen many times where building on that, people in the business are sort of confused and feel undervalued or devalued even because, they're very busy. The whole business is busy. The colleagues are busy. They're busy. But then the founder, the owner, the director or directors, so maybe throw up at the end of a month that the business isn't doing but that well, and there's a huge disconnect in people's minds there, isn't there? They might not see the numbers themselves at that stage, but hang on a minute, we're really busy, and yet we've been told that we're not, doing that well as a business. How can that be true? How can that not only puzzles people, but it demotivates people, doesn't it? And if we can make those numbers more visible and make people more connected with the commercial performance, they can see what their busyness delivers. And they can
Yeah,
also feel, if challenged with it, can also say, well, okay, well, if we're that busy and the numbers are only this, then we need to try and work a bit smarter or work better, or we need to analyze where some of our work is going and it's being wasted, or it's not landing on an invoice somewhere. So let's find that out, because we all our hard work can't go to waste here. It can't go to just contribute a small amount of money.
yeah. That's a good point you raised there. And I was going to ask this anyways. When you talk about senior leadership or senior members of staff becoming demotivated for whatever reason, it could be the one you've given there, where they're doing all the work, they're not seeing the revenue come out, and it could be because of over-servicing or overutilization or whatever it is. Once they get to that stage of being demotivated, what do you think is a good way for agency leaders and founders to pull them out of that? And the reason I bring this up is because many times I've had clients and just people I talk to ask about incentivization. How do they incentivize people to be more commercially accountable, right? To do things, whether it's on the sales side or getting them to do some of the processes that they need to do in order for the agency to grow. So, what do you think is a good way to get people out of that demotivated state and actually incentivize them or encourage them to help move the business forward?
Yeah, good question. You just threw that out there, incentivization. I know you weren't suggesting that was the answer, but I think that might be part of the sort of toolbox of answers. But incentives for me are not the default go-to solution, actually, because I think where this stuff happens is there's a lack of, what you mentioned it right at the start, there's a lack of understanding, lack of clarity and education around what all this means. So educating first is then providing people with the information that they need is point number one. But secondly, I usually find this commercial accountability doesn't usually raise its head on the financial accounts first. I think it raises its head on people getting pissed off with working very hard and seemingly not getting anywhere, and
Yeah,
finding their job is, as the agency grows, we've got more people around me here as colleagues, that's good, but actually the work feels harder, the work feels faster and more stressed, and also the founders telling us we're not making that as much money as what he'd hoped or she'd hoped, and that's not good either. So what do I see as a solution? This is a something I've been sort of talking to a lot of agency owners about, and it's a tricky one because this is not a quick fix. This is, I see as a solution, a let's get as a team. We're going to run a change project that is going to review how we work in this business in terms of the processes, in terms of responsibilities and clarity around roles, in terms of who makes decisions, how information is stored, how information gets transferred around the business. And actually, it all ladders up to commercial accountability. But really, the change project, we need to re engineer how this business works because we've outgrown our original processes. And we've probably outgrown them because they didn't exist really in the first place. They just appeared. We started work. We started doing work for clients. People came with different ideas as to what we should be doing. Some of them we adopted. Some of them as across the business. Others do. Sometimes people do their own things, and we do it. The other person does it slightly differently. It's their habits rather than processes. So sometimes, those again, the foundations don't exist. So it's not the most exciting thing. You need to make it exciting, but it's not the most exciting thing in the world. But I think there's a sort of a project to say. I call it rewiring the house whilst keeping the lights on. So we need to keep the lights on, as in deliver the work and continue to do the work. But we're going to rewire the house. We're going to look at individual aspects. And if the founder, people were to accept that, and people running agencies listening to this, hopefully, say, okay, yeah, that sounds like a lot of hard work, but that's what it needs doing because we've outgrown our processes and systems. But if the founder or the founders just take that on themselves, then we don't stand any chance of getting much traction on it or people feeling accountable for it. It needs to be a team driven and a business driven project, really, where we need to get as many people as possible involved and start to get people thinking about how can we do these things simpler? How can we map some of these processes? Where is the pain? Where is the waste? Where is the friction in the agency? Because we want to eliminate it. And why do we want to remove it and eliminate it where we can? Well, so the founder can sit with a P&L that looks healthier, yeah, but also, and perhaps more importantly, for the people in the business on the day-to-day level, so things are easier. So we're not running in treacle every time we come in the business, so we can get work done faster and go home on time, or so we don't need to have 3, 4 meetings about the same thing. We just have one, and therefore our lives are easier and the business is performing better. So that's where I'd sort of start. But it is that I appreciate that is a big task. But I think I'm talking to 2 or 3 agencies at the moment about doing that, and they've embraced that. Each of them in slightly different ways, particularly with AI here and coming further down the tracks. We were talking earlier today, weren't we, about AI can help us with some of these processes, of course, and make things easier and faster for us. But if you deploy an AI system or deploy AI onto a broken, messy system, then it's just going to make the broken mess faster or break faster. It's not going to solve it because there's fundamentally underneath the system it needs re-engineering. And I think people don't appreciate that, and it comes through growth. Growth demands that because if you're a small agency, 2 or 3 people, you can deliver the work, and it's a bit kick and rush, but it sort of gets done through enthusiasm and working together and pulling together, and it gets done. But then when you start to grow, you need to sort of look at how things are done and re-engineer them. You can't do the same things the same way when you're you can't do the same things the same way when you're 16 people as you did when you were 6 people, and you certainly
Yeah,
do them the same way when you're 66 people than when you were 16 people.
I agreed. I saw Callum Healy's post about just that, the whole thing about AI coming in, but if the foundation's not there, then it doesn't make any sense because it all falls apart. It's there to improve what's already there. It's not there to fix it or create something more, which I found interesting and definitely applicable here.
Yeah, absolutely.
I'll tell you.
Callum's
Sorry,
my
go on.
Callum's my son. He's recently graduated and wants to work in AI. But he's not only my son; he's my AI guru. We're now sort of working together on that sort of stuff and having conversations about it. So it's really good.
Where you were talking about the agencies coming together and working on a new process and change management process together, I do have an example of that. When I worked for one of the bigger agencies, it got to a point where they got some of us, some of the senior directors and people to sit down in a room for a week. It was a sprint week, and then figure out how we change processes, come up with new things, and all of this stuff. And it was brilliant. So many smart ideas and best ways of working came out of it. However, playing into the whole accountability piece, on the back of that, all of the great ideas, all of the things that the hard work and all of that that came out of it just didn't get implemented.
No.
So the accountability thing plays on both sides. It is on the at the very top.
Yeah.
So founders, leaders, owners, they need to first of all practice what they preach and hold themselves accountable
Yeah.
to actually improving the business and doing what they say they're going to do, if they're expecting anyone else to be accountable for their roles as well, because you can't have people participate in what you've described there, right, and everyone chips in with ideas and does all this great work, and then they turn around and then nothing's being done, nothing's being implemented.
Yeah.
So it works on every level. It's not just the employees, it's also the I'd even argue most importantly the founders, because
Yeah.
everyone's looking to you for direction, right? And if
Yeah.
you're not doing it, then people just don't take it seriously.
No, totally. That's a great point to reiterate, and I totally accept that. I agree with that. I think it's important. My son Callum, he calls it the IKEA effect. He talks about if people are involved in building the furniture, they feel better about it. It might be a painful process in itself, building it, following those instructions, but they feel good about the fact that I built that wardrobe or whatever it might be, or I rebuilt that process. But to your point there, somebody needs to drive it. Don't leave all the bits and pieces on the floor with the instructions, with it half built, and forget about it. Somebody needs to be saying, hang on a minute, there's a time frame here. We need that section built by then, this section built by then. We need the whole thing built by the end of next week or next month or whenever it is. So somebody needs to drive it, and it needs to be the founder and the person at the top as well, to show that commitment, to show how important it is, to show how important it is to the business, but how important it is to them. And I've seen a couple of examples of people trying to do this, and particularly in slightly bigger agencies where the founder, the owner, delegates this type of stuff to sort of usually an operations director, who is the right person probably to have it delegated to them, but they tend to delegate it to them and say, right, away you go, and then lose interest in it. And if it doesn't come right from the top, to your point, then it's never going to work.
We briefly touched on incentivization. What do you think about agency founders and owners giving financial rewards, of basically bonuses, to people to do some of these tasks? So, for example, they might say to the senior directors, you're responsible for doing this amount of new business or client development. And off the back of that, you get X amount bonus or whatever it is. What are your thoughts? Because I have mine, but it'd be interesting to hear from you.
Yeah, no, I mean, incentives. I have used incentives extensively, deployed incentives in my agency owning career. So I'm not dead against them. But in terms of maybe touching back upon what I said earlier, that particularly for this situation, they're not my default go-to tool, actually, because I guess if things are broken, if processes and the system is ill or weak, then I think it's within the interest of everybody to rebuild it, to improve it. And I don't think you really get much traction off paying people extra to do that. I do think when the system is solid and working, then I like the idea of using incentives to say, right, you've got the engine, we have the engine now, it's working. Now, here's an incentive. If you can get the engine to work at another 20% capacity, then here's an incentive, and you'll share in a part of that extra output. But to actually sort of, fix and review some of these systems, I'd be interested to see what you say, but I'm not a huge fan of it at that stage. It comes after that for me. I do think incentives, are not always monetary, are they? I think a lot of agencies lacking this sort of commercial accountability, I see, not they don't celebrate the sort of commercial, they celebrate. What do they celebrate? They celebrate getting work done by hook or by crook. They celebrate
Mhm.
good client feedback. Of course they do, and those things are important. But they don't celebrate smart decisions, or they don't celebrate somebody having a go at changing something and maybe failing a little bit, but nevertheless the idea was right and the motivation behind changing how something works was right. Maybe it failed a bit, but they don't hold them up and say what Tom did there didn't quite work, but he's absolutely spot on that we need to work faster in this business, and how we did it, that maybe a mistake was made by trying to do something. So we'll rectify that. But I celebrate Tom because Tom's thinking about how we can move faster in this business. And maybe it's not an incentive as such, maybe it's more a recognition and reward. But I think maybe there is a recognition for that sort of stuff rather than um, just winning new business, just the client feedback, and also we've hit another deadline. It's nearly killed us, but we've hit the deadline again. That tends to be the stuff that gets held up in town hall meetings and stuff. What do you think?
Yeah, for me, I agree with you in terms of incentives do work in certain circumstances. However, I don't think when I say incentive, I'll be specific in saying financial incentives or
Yes.
financial rewards. I don't think they're always the solution to this, especially when you talk about, people being demotivated or like we say, the process isn't working type of thing. Because for one, usually the level of incentivization is not enough to change anybody's life, anyways. And if the process wasn't there, it's not that they didn't want to do it, but it's they didn't know how to do it or what to do. So I think there are many other things, and I like your suggestion on recognition. That's for many people, just being seen and being recognized for the work that you're doing is more of an incentive than, oh, here's a few £100 or a few £1,000
Yeah.
for doing something that is part of your job description, anyways.
Yeah.
So I think I agree. There is a time and place for incentives, but I don't think that is usually always the solution to this problem.
Yeah. Oh, good. I mean, these things can be small steps as well, can't they? So commercial accountability, just somebody, so ultimately this is about the financial performance of the business, but underneath, in order to deliver that financial performance, working smarter, working better, improving the systems, improving how we work in order to make things easier, in order to make things more efficient, more profitable for us as a business. So I think that can really go down into quite small chunks, and sort of somebody in an agency somewhere saying, reporting is often one. The volume of reporting in a paid media agency. There's lots of reports to do. Quite rightly, clients are paying money for performance marketing and paid media campaigns. They want to see whether it's working or not. They need a report. But so often I've seen where reports are just set. These are the reports we do. We just churn them out every month. That's how we do it. People just blindly churn them out. And I'm interested in people thinking, does the client really read all this stuff? Is this the format that's correct for them? Do they need the report? Do they need a 20-page report, or would they prefer a 5-page report? Do they need a report every week, or actually would they prefer a report every month? And
Yeah.
just sort of reviewing that sort of stuff means that if there are answers to that, sometimes if there are responses to those sort of questions, I mean, actually, so now we've looked at it, the client doesn't need as a bigger report, doesn't need it as frequently, or maybe they need a less frequent but bigger report, a larger report. Maybe that's what, but ultimately that means that waste in the process can be removed,
Yeah.
and people can potentially spend less time on that client doing the reports and more time on another client doing a report. And again, not doing nothing, just repurposing that time. And I think if somebody in a business, in an agency, is even at a junior level, coming to me and saying, I've had a look at this, and Gareth, and I've decided, I've talked to my client, and this is how they want to do it, and that's going to be easy for us, and it's going to make less time, so I can spend time on another client, or maybe even I can spend more time on that client, but not on reporting, on actually, driving, creating value, and doing some of the work. Then that's the sort of stuff that I would, recognize and celebrate and say, we need more of this. Here's a great example. We need more of that thinking in this business. Might not be reporting in your particular area, because you might not do that, but it might be something else. But it's that sort of thinking to say, This is what this. I'm sick of doing these reports. There must be an easier, better, simpler way of doing them that my client appreciates as well as makes things easier for me and therefore makes more profit for the business.
Yeah, that's where you want to get to as a business when
Mm.
you get that sort of involvement in everything, every step of the way in operations and just the way things are done. Because you find those efficiencies and people get better at doing things because they're aware of what is going on and how it's happening and how they can improve it. So that is definitely it.
Becomes you
So
want become more of a commercial culture, don't you? More
yeah,
of a not as in a sweatshop or as in a everything's about the numbers, not that far, but a step towards people are looking at things and thinking, why are we spending so much time doing that when we could be doing this?
yeah,
Does the client really value it? Do we get paid for it? Do we
yeah.
get paid enough for it? No. Well, let's have a look at that. We can change that a little bit.
100%. I always talk about making commerciality part of your agency culture. And it is for this reason. So, by that, I mean, if commerciality is on everybody's mind, like you said, not turning the agency into a sweatshop and not making everyone, profit mad,
Yeah.
but at the same time, striking that balance and making everyone have commerciality at the back of their mind. So you just said there as an example, we're doing all this. Is the client paying for that? Should we be doing this? Is there a better way of doing this? How can we put these people on the account instead of these other ones? Because these other ones are way more expensive and we don't get the remuneration or payment from using these people. Those sorts of conversations, when you get everybody on that page and everyone talking and thinking along those lines, it helps the agency as a whole. That's where, commerciality then becomes part of the culture. That's when, people, you don't need to hold them accountable. They hold themselves accountable for, what they should be doing and what they do and, the growth of the agency. That's definitely a place to get to. Perfect. Well, Gareth, thank you so much. So, we've talked about a lot of things here. We've talked about the accountability for agency founders and owners. Commercial accountability isn't just for the staff and people, that work in the agency, but it starts at the top. We talked about, involving everybody in the commercial practices of the agency. We talked about making sure that people are incentivized the right way, not just financially, but other areas as well, just acknowledgement and recognition for efforts. What else have we talked about?
Yeah, re-engineering the business and
Yeah.
not just thinking that again, we're talking agencies, but any organization can grow and the same systems can grow with it. That's not always the case. You need to review the systems and re-engineer the systems to cope with the growth. I think that's a blind spot for many agency owners. They start off and they think, that this one process for 4 people will be the same when it's 40 people. That's not the case.
Absolutely. Talked about the insights as well, making sure that people have the right insights into what's going on in the business operationally.
Yeah.
Talks about training, making sure people have the knowledge and ability to actually deliver and understand commerciality. So I think we've definitely touched on many valuable areas and points
Yeah.
around this commercial accountability. So thank you so much. Is there one last thing you'd like to add before we go?
I thought that I'd like to add that I think that was a great session. I know I'm biased because we're here doing it, but that was another good, interesting session, but so important. I guess my sort of end line would be something I've just touched upon, but sort of when as an agency grows, their headcount can often scale faster than the accountability unless you design and redesign the business to cope with it. So that would be my sort of parting shot. And you can't expect the accountability you feel as a founder to transfer to your team by osmosis. You need to take steps to lead, as you described, lead from the front and train and educate people and tell them how important it is and help them. I think that helps them in people. I always say understanding the commercials of a business can help the founder of an agency, help people in the jobs, but it can help people in their careers as well, couldn't it? Whether that
Yeah.
career is with that agency, which it probably won't be forever. But if people can learn about this stuff in one business, it's stuff they can take elsewhere, or maybe even use if they start their own business. So it's all learning and growing, isn't it?
Absolutely. Well, thank you so much, Gareth, for another amazing episode,
Thanks,
and
Alfie.
look forward to talking to you again soon.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks for your time, and yeah, really enjoyed it.